Castelian. I remember the day I saw a box of Game Boy games in my local car boot. In this very field, with this cartridge nestled inside, like a tarantula in a box of Turkish Delight.
How bad could it be for 50p though? I happily forked over the required cash and went on my merry way. Sadly, it turns out that it might well be my least favourite title on the Game Boy.
It's worth giving a little background on the game first, however, as there's actually quite a lot to cover. This is a title with a mildly interesting history.
Originally released in 1987 called Nebulous, the game was brought to a smattering of systems, including the ZX Spectrum, Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, Commodore Amiga, Atari ST, and the Acorn Archimedes.
Anyone else think Acorn Archimedes sounds like a villain from a kids' TV show? Or is it just me?
It was also called Tower Toppler in the US, and was praised for its ambition in the visuals department. As you can see, it's a basic 2D platformer where you climb up large structures avoiding foes and obstacles. But, uniquely, for the time anyway, it boasts a 3D effect in the background while you do so.
It wasn't until 1991 when it saw a release on the NES and Game Boy, and was retitled Castelian.
This version of the game was developed by the prolific Bits Studios, who went on to create a couple of classic Game Boy Color titles, Strategy Gem Warlocked and Superlative Shooter Collection R-Type DX. Sadly, its best work certainly doesn't include Castelian. By the time the game was released, the nifty 3D background gimmick wasn't a huge draw, you see, meaning the actual game lying underneath was put under much more scrutiny.
And as it turns out, well, let's have a look, shall we?
These few seconds are indicative of the game as a whole. I played Castelian for hours, but this could be the whole review. I'm aware that calling this one of the worst Game Boy titles in existence sounds a little hyperbolic though. So with that in mind, I'm going to outline my 4 main reasons for having such a strong distaste for this seemingly innocuous side-scroller. First up is the game's sycophantic love of trial and error. It goes so overboard with it the ship's already 1,000 miles over the horizon. Having to memorise sections of an older title in order to beat it is not rare. And although this design strategy should probably never have been accepted, you sadly can't change the past. Well, usually. It's best to explain how this is such an issue by outlining how the game works first of all though. It's very simple really. You play as this pig-like chap named Julius and amble slowly up each tower, of which there are 8, using stairs, elevators and doors to help you. As you might expect, there are some enemies to avoid, varying from ones that have a simple pattern like these eyeballs, to spheroids which are incredibly unpredictable. Then there are hexalons, which will become the bane of your life if you sadly end up playing Castelian. These appear every few seconds and head for you in a straight line, knocking you down at least one level if they touch you, or get anywhere near you actually. But moving back onto the trial and error problem, one of your biggest foes is the unpredictable terrain. Certain platforms disappear, many elevators throw you straight into an enemy, and some of the doors lead you to, well, nothing at all. There is basically no way to know what will come next, unless you're the next Johnny Smith.
The platform is gonna break!
Ah, too late. Thanks anyway, Johnny.
If somebody could actually complete the opening level on their first attempt, I would. Well, it doesn't matter what I do, as it's never going to happen.
Things don't get much better with practice either, as there's a huge random element added into the mix, such as the fact that you can't tell where roaming enemies will be at any time, thanks to the 3D backgrounds. Basically, one small mistake can result in you seeing this screen and hearing this delightful drone, over and over again. The second black mark against Castelian is the control scheme and general feel of the game. Julius is not the most nimble, in fact he's incredibly slow considering the storm of strangeness surrounding him. And this would be fine if the game was built around that fact, but it's not. The majority of the enemies are much faster than you for one, but it's the way you can fight back that adds further insult to injury. Your main weapon, small balls that Julius fires from his groin,
Let's not get sidetracked here, there's a lot to cover.
Are shot using the A button. Sadly, these can eliminate some of the spheroids, but nothing else. Here's the real kicker though, you also jump using the A button. When stationary you shoot, and when moving you jump. It's a maddeningly illogical decision considering the B button isn't used at all, and results in unintentional deaths aplenty. So not only are the levels infuriatingly designed, you're also ill-equipped to tackle them, and you'll just end up getting more frustrated and wish Julius would get a move on. Which brings me on to point number 3. Julius being slow is already a problem, but it's made an even bigger issue because of how much time you're given to climb to the top of each tower. In most platforming games, the counter at the top of the screen is nothing to worry about. You can quite happily ignore it and play with no need to rush. Not so here. The quote by Argentinian Eva Perón, "Time is my greatest enemy," is none more apt when used in relation to Castelian. 1 or 2 errors can make it impossible to reach the top of a tower, and with the added panic of the ever-ticking counter, you're more likely to make a fatal error. Further proof, if it was needed, of the game's mean streak is that none of the enemies actually kill you per se either. Instead, they make you take a tumble down a level or 2, which, thanks to the time limit, can be as good as a fatal blow. You can't restart if you feel completing a stage has become impossible too. You either have to throw yourself into the drink at the bottom of the tower, or wait until the clock puts you out for the count. Seeing as some later levels are incredibly cryptic, you even have to deliberately get hit by hexalons in specific places to progress at points, some more time is almost always needed to work things out. But any such generosity to the player would be out of character with the rest of the game. My 4th and final point is that this game feels like it could have been a solid puzzle platformer if only it hadn't been designed with such a cruel mentality. True, any potential it had has been buried so deep it would require an army of Mr. Drillers to get to, but it is there. You can almost hear its muffled cries for help. It was never going to be the Citizen Kane of games, of course. That already exists anyway, but it has a nice visual gimmick and a simple concept that could have been executed quite well. Instead, it's a cold-hearted experience that seems to take pleasure from your misery. Bonus levels are almost impossible, there's no way to save your progress, and even the title tries to trick you in the way it's spelt. There are far more inferior things on a technical level that you can play on your Game Boy, of course. Fortress of Fear, Wizards and Warriors X, and Goal are just 2 examples that come to mind, but they were just poorly made. Castelian, on the other hand, seems to have been intentionally designed to put a crimp on your day. The developer had the chance to alter the original game and make it more accessible and fun, but instead it decided to make it even more unpleasant. And that's why I think it's one of the worst games on the Game Boy, if not the worst.
Well, the game has certainly beaten me. That's all for this episode then. Thanks for watching. Actually, forget that. It's time for action. Time to finish this game once and for all. Time to go.
Oh, he got a big one!